document it with the facts that actually exist. And sometimes we won't find the facts. But perhaps we can triangulate in and figure out the best we can in terms of what likely may have occurred. And that's where I'm trying to get to. The other thing that's interesting here is that as near as could be learned, his father's name was Sparrow Joseph Nerevich. This was Peter's father. So Margaret and Sparrow Joseph Nerevich, he was an Austrian merchant, basically begat Peter Joseph. And there's a lot of interesting stories there that I can share offline, but there's some interesting things that happened with Peter in his young life in New Orleans. So the next piece is trying to provide clarity and context in terms of what you're after. Don talked just a few minutes ago about the 84 pages you said that were a timeline, and that's fantastic. I have something very similar, but one of the things that helps me is to see something visual. So what I did is I created a timeline here that shows how things kind of fit together. And by doing this, you can overlay, you can start to see things that make sense, things that maybe are out of kilter, and perhaps it will expose things that you haven't thought about, which is really the key to this. As I'm trying to learn more about Margaret, I'm trying to broaden my net in terms of how I'm searching for her. Things that may not be directly related to her potentially will lead me back to her story. So the anecdotal history of what's going on in the city here may help me better understand why or when Margaret was actually sold. So that's one of the things that I'm trying to do. The other thing that's neat here is that when I start to look at the immediate family and then I compare that to other Syphaxes, is that I can start to overlay what's going on in history. We know that William Syphax, who an elementary school is named after in this area, basically worked for the Interior Department for a number of years. Well, we can start to put some things in here and see where Peter Joseph and Margaret and those folks may have started to overlay on that. It's clear from documentation that we have in the family that they knew of each other. They corresponded with each other, which really is important about family ties. And that's the other piece for me in this whole thing, is who, what, and where, is to propagate that information to our family, to our kids, to the other parts of the family who may not know each other. Okay. So, documentation and artifacts are really important. This particular document I found just during a research trip to New Orleans back in May. Actually, I've been trying to document Peter's relationship with his mother, Margaret. I know from his death certificate that he lists her, he lists Sparrow Nerevich, but this is the first document that I've seen from the state of Louisiana that actually shows that Margaret Frost, Syphax, who actually died in 1877, her death certificate was signed by her son, documenting the fact that she had died. So that's it was a nice piece for me in terms of actually beginning to tie the pieces back together again. Now, one of the things that allows us to tie these two people back to Virginia and to this house is that we have a letter written by Peter Joseph in 1857 to his grandmother Nancy. And he talks about wanting to be back here, how much he misses her. In fact, in 1868, he moved north for about a year with his wife and their first daughter, Eleanor. And they could only handle the conditions up here in the north for about a year, and then they headed back to south because they liked the warmer climate. But it indicates to me that there was a desire to stay connected, a desire to understand what their history was, and a desire to understand the extended family, like the William Syphaxes, who were another part of the extension of the family. So when we think about bringing artifacts to life, this really does it for me. This is actually that 1857 letter written from Peter Joseph to his grandmother. I've got it downstairs in a binder if you're interested in looking at it, and I've actually kind of translated it. It's hard to read this clearly, but I've translated it so you can actually see what's going on. What we learned from this, we learned several things. Going back to what Don had said, is that every word means something. And when you pick this apart, you learn that he has a sister and two brothers. You're able to put into context when those folks were born. So you're actually able to add more to the timeline. And it actually talks about some people who he had relationships with. He talks about being at the house of a person named Cornfrans, C-O-R-F-R-A-N-S. And I've looked this person up, and we can find it in the census, but we don't know a lot more about these folks. But it gives us some tracks or some hints on where we might start to look. So this particular document is one that's pretty special to the family because it really starts to tie people back to the decayed house. Here's another interesting artifact that we found. I found this several years ago when I attended a activity. It was actually done by the archives over in the archives building. And they were talking about blacks in the area, and one of the letters that they had was a letter from my great-grandfather to Rutherford B. Hayes. Silly, why would he write to the president? Well, the history behind this is that my great-grandfather was actually a Civil War veteran. He served in the Civil War. Shortly after that, he got involved with politics, did a variety of things, and ultimately, in 1876, he was a presidential elector for the Hayes-Tilden election. And so, as a result of that, you may recall that in 1876, that was a very contested election. There was a lot going on. There were several states, including Louisiana, who happened to be tipping states. And it turned out that as a result of some of the votes that came out of that, that Hayes won the president's position. Well, shortly after that, hey, I know the president, so I'm going to send him a letter. Well, it turns out he sends him a letter that basically says, I have this cousin named William Syphax, and he works in the Interior Department. It would be great if you could find another position for him. So in 1888, he's sending the president a note saying, hey, I got this cousin, I'd like to try to find a job for him. And William was actually doing a pretty good job himself in terms of working in education and doing things in the Interior Department. So I don't think he needed that help, but it's neat to see relatives that from such a distance that knew one another and were out to help each other. The other artifact on the right is the obituary for Peter Joseph. You can see there, he looks Caucasian. I think, you know, his Austrian heritage really shows up there, but he would not beget the fact that he was black. He wouldn't leave his mother. He was given an opportunity to do some other things as a young man, that he chose not to do that because he would have to have said that he did disown his mother, and he would not do that, which shows a lot of courage on his part. But the other thing here is that you read up there at the top, it says, refuse a bribe of fortune. Well, as a part of that presidential election in 1876, Peter Joseph was apparently offered something on the order of about $100,000, of which he turned down. Now, we can't actually document that, but the paper records state that this, in fact, was the case. And there was a lot of that kind of thing going on, but how much of this is blown out of proportion and how much... There may have been a bribe, maybe it was $10, they added some more zeros or something onto it. But the point is that there are places where that you can look to find information about relatives that may help you tie back important information. So finally, just a few things to remember for those of you that are searching for people is keep it simple. Ask a particular question and focus on that. Doesn't mean that it won't turn into something more complex, but start simple. Take good notes. Don was talking about his 84 pages. We're looking at some things here in terms of using our online resources, but it's important to make tracks. Know where you've already been so you don't go back there. Or at least know where to pick up if you need to go back there. That's an important piece. Seek help to guide your work. There are a lot of people who are passionate about genealogy, so seek help. There are a lot of groups and genealogy clubs and things that you can be a part of. Those folks have lots of resources, and if nothing else, they share the same passion as you as you're thinking about how to do it. And it kind of keeps you going when you start figuring out you hit a wall. Develop a research strategy. If you come downstairs and look at the table I actually have the research strategy that I have for Martha. And I can show you all the questions that I'm asking, how I'm going about doing it. But it's important to have a strategy so you don't keep going in circles. And finally, it's about having fun. This is a passion for me, and I'm going to do this forever. There are a lot of things that I want to answer, but it's fun. And that's where you have to keep it. If it becomes too much work, then you kind of lose some of the love of it, and you kind of want to put it down. So have fun. So with that, I will end. answer any questions, and encourage you to come downstairs and see the artifacts that are in the hallway are things that I brought to share with you all today. There's a lot of neat things down there, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Back to the timeline.
What are those little letters in red?
So the letters in red are actually Peter Joseph's children. So I wanted, without taking up too much space, I wanted to know where on the timeline the children were born. So we have he actually had 10 children, three of which died in childhood before 10, and the others made it to adulthood. His second child, this is Ellender, this is the child that was born just before he came up to Washington to live for a year. So that's what you can see there's several here and there's several over here as well. Yes?
Do you know how did Margaret become free? Because it seems like her son, maybe I'm wrong, but that Peter Joseph was born free and the slave status usually followed the matrilineal line.
That's a very good question. She remained a slave after she got down there, but what I don't know is when she was free. And I'm trying to search that out. But what we do know, based on our family lore, is that she forced Sparrow Nerevich, the Austrian, to buy his freedom at his birth. The child's freedom at his birth. So he was a free child at birth.
Do you have a record of how much that transaction was?
I don't know. And so I'm looking for that kind of transaction. I'm also looking for the purchase transaction for Margaret, either down there or up here, to try to tie that time as well. Other questions? Comments? Where's the name? Yes. That's, some people say that it's a king from, Europe, and, I'm just not there yet. I haven't, but it's a very interesting name, and the best part about it is it makes it easy to find. It's not, we're talking about Jones this morning, Smith, those are tough, but Syphax is a little easier. Wormley's a little easier to figure out as well. Yes, sir. Well, interestingly enough, after the Civil War, he basically was taught to be a Mason. So that was Peter Joseph's professional path settled down, as it were. There was still a lot of segregation that was happening. Around the 1870s, 80s, 90s, a lot of segregation and tension still existed. My great-grandfather was involved in militias and helping to deal with that, as also in masonry. And you may recall that as the West was opening up, there were opportunities for Masons. So he ended up moving his family from New Orleans to Denver, Colorado around 1890. And the reason for that was, and this is what I love about this, is that you're looking at what's going on in society that affects how you operate. So tensions in New Orleans, wanting to find a better life for his family. Colorado, Denver, a new city kind of springing up. They are changing laws to say we will not build with wood. We're not going to do frame housing. We're going to do masonry. So people that are masons are saying, hey, I got it. We're moving west. And so that's how they ended up in Denver. I'll just say, as we break here, the artifacts that are downstairs, there's a Civil War medal from Peter Joseph that is down there. And there's also a Civil War sword that is Peter Joseph's. 1870-ish is when he actually received that. And I hope you have some, enjoy taking a look at that stuff. So thank you very much.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but it's a war. It's a war.
Absolutely. That's exactly right.
That's exactly right. So you go back down and research again?
Oh yeah, it's on my list to go back.
Yeah, we got two things that big library. Two names. Well, somebody say we do.
Diller and my mother.
She would have been happy.
Well, we're still cousins. We're like fourth cousins.
Where's Craig? Oh, Craig's on my side.
So I mean, we can do it. We're like fourth or fifth cousins because you go back to this.
Craig, right next to the
Onde vivia.